He gave voice to his motivation today in front of the cameras. And yet, am I correct that you believe you don't think he did it?
Well, Chris, one thing I always liked about watching you is you're a lawyer, okay? So I don't know if you've done much criminal work or not, but my client hasn't faced any actual criminal charges from New York yet.
A 26-year-old man has been charged with the murder of a health insurance executive who was shot dead in a street in New York last week.
And what he didn't say is that he's innocent. And forget the fact that when he sees the cameras, he's like a tiger, but he was a pussy cat when it was just him and the officers.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't breathe. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the only channel not to publish the CEO's Manifesto. Now, it's hard not to see a common thread between Luigi Mangione, Thomas Crooks, and the countless young men out there that become mass shooters. By the way, I've written a couple of books on mass shooters, and what they fear, what is common amongst these young men, is insignificance. When you're in your early 20s, it's a time of becoming and sometimes failure to become. And that can feel very undermining, very emasculating. And when they can't find a solution out of their own social death, what do? How do they solve this problem? And that's when a primal animalistic response seems to kick in, especially among young men. And look at this post that Luigi Mangione reposted just a couple of months ago. If you want to understand men better, just look at all the movies they've made, books they've written, the games they invent when they're young. The games they invent, this is something that stood out, that resonated with the 26-year-old. Almost every single one is about a young man being thrust into a position or situation he doesn't know if he can overcome. This is what's resonating in his mind, in his heart. Many times he actually believes he can't, so he initially refuses the challenge. Reluctantly, he's forced out of the comfort of his home by an unlikely group of future friends. In the end, he rises above, he wins, he conquers. He conquers first himself, and then he conquers the threat. Is that what's happened here? Men are made for impossible situations and daring feats. They are born with a hero's heart. This is innate. Can you see how this is, in a way, a kind of manifesto of sorts, an affirmative manifesto, but nevertheless a manifesto? And this is being read and interpreted by Luigi Mangione in the way that he wants to interpret it. He needs to conquer the threat. And look at what it says at the end. This is the heart that society is trying so hard to quash. And that is exactly what he's experiencing. He's feeling it as society is quashing me, or corporate America is quashing me, right? That's how he's experiencing it. That's the feeling that he's getting. Is that feeling real, though? Based on his behavior outside court, as well as his disappearing and becoming estranged from his own family for months, it's also difficult to imagine drugs didn't play a role. It's not a long road from pain medication and depression to addiction. And we see some hints of that in his social media. So like this, what do you think? Did drugs play a role here? He talks about psychedelics every now and then. And so in this analysis, I want to raise 4 insights that you're probably not going to see on another channel. And hopefully it's going to mean something to you, and hopefully it's going to be a meaningful conversation compared to the reptilian ruminations that are going out there, the sort of reflexive shock value type stuff that is going on for the most part. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to those of you who have subscribed. As I mentioned earlier, I have written books on this case. Do you know any other YouTubers who've done that, who've written books profiling mass shooters and dealing with manifestos, that have got experience understanding the kind of person who writes manifestos? And in this case, we are dealing with an educated, intelligent, but somehow deluded young man. How did that happen? Why did that happen? And is that happening elsewhere amongst America's young men? what's the way out of that? If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So we're going to go through 4 points. Let's see how long your attention span can carry you through. Are you going to just survive the first point, the second, or are you going to make it all the way to the end? Let's have a look. Number 1, social media impact in reinforcing a persecution complex. Now, I think what is most disturbing to me about this case is actually the public. Luigi Mangione is a symptom right now of America. This post that he put up a couple of months ago in April has now been seen by 1 million people. It's a repost. Netflix, DoorDash, and true crime podcasts have stolen more dreams than failure ever will. Think about how true that is to Luigi Mangione. His dreams have just been stolen, a lot through his own doing. But think about how what we fill our minds and hearts with on a daily basis does the same thing. And now what are we doing? We're filling our hearts and minds with someone's manifesto. Is it a very functional thing to do? And you might say, I found his manifesto quite interesting. But it might be a bit more compelling for another young man who's got a bone to pick with society and needs a rationale to act. Then there's this from Tim Urban. It'll soon become ubiquitous among upper class families to restrict kids from under 16 from using social media. And so you've got this weird thing where Luigi Mangione seems to be aware of the damage that can be caused consuming social media, and let's even expand that to Netflix and certain computer games. And yet isn't he doing it anyway? And I think the same can be said about you and about me and about America, is that you're aware of the damage and the danger of social media, but you're going to consume it anyway. And the damage is going to be done regardless, because we're just helplessly floating along the algorithm, and it's going to take us where we need to go, isn't it? I mean, the only way to interrupt that process is through critical thinking, and who's doing that? And so what we see is just how popular a murderer can become, a lot on the basis of a platform like X. And I don't mean popularly despised, but treated as a kind of folk hero.
And America's got a crush on a bad boy, like really like murder bad. Anyways.
According to the Financial Times, Mangione's X account had jumped from just a few hundred followers to more than 200,000 by Monday evening. Guess where it is now? Almost double that, approaching 400,000 followers, on its way to 500,000. Now think about that. You shoot someone, write a manifesto, and suddenly you go from being a pretty obscure account, right? Having less than 1,000 followers isn't really successful in terms of one's influence on social media. And then overnight, murder, manifesto, instant celebrity. That's kind of a recipe, and if you think about it, a very dangerous, disturbing, and wrong criminal recipe. And who's playing into that? Well, for the most part, you, the global you, the collective, the audience that's out there. Beneath photos of what appeared to be his Facebook and Instagram accounts no longer accessible. And think about that. Facebook and Instagram and YouTube have removed his accounts, but X hasn't. Some replies praised his alleged violence. So you leave an account active, and here you actually have a community forming, saying things like calling him a king and demanding that the police free him. And so by allowing his account to remain public, you're actually creating an agglomeration, almost a congregation of adherents and followers, and people to get to know each other and to reinforce one another and perhaps to inspire one another. And think about that word on X, 380,000 followers. Who do you follow on X? Oh, I follow a murderer. He wrote a manifesto. I really agree with it. What could go wrong with a thing like that? Also from the Financial Times, some people have been taken aback by the outpouring of admiration and sympathy for Mangione online. Have you been? Are you part of the admiration, or are you someone who doesn't feel the same way? Someone said on the Financial Times, we are a short step from chaos if you start to support people who are working outside of the system of justice and the rule of law. Number 2, used Manifesto of Unabomber as inspiration. What could be wrong with putting a manifesto out there and we all talk about it and we all think about it, and we should publish the whole thing transparently and just put it out there? It's about the First Amendment. On social media, some who have posted the Killer's Manifesto have received tens of millions of views, like this one. Such has been the thirst, the demand to get the manifesto out there, some people have put fake manifestos out there. Some on social media naively think they're doing America a service by republishing the Killer's Manifesto. And those who are reading it say, well, we demand to read it and we should be allowed to read it. Guess what? That's what the killer is counting on. That's exactly what he wants. And that's precisely why he committed the crime, for the attention. I mean, the lack of critical thinking in this regard is laughable if this wasn't so disturbing. I put up a poll not that long ago where 75%, 3/4 of those polled said they saw nothing wrong, nothing inappropriate with publishing a manifesto. Some on social media think that doing this makes them more transparent or better than the mainstream media. Of course, social media is better than the mainstream media, right? It's actually very, very short-sighted. It's reckless, it's irresponsible, and it has the potential to fuel similar crimes in other disenfranchised individuals. And you see this all the time with mass shooters. You don't republish the manifesto because you want to prevent another mass shooting. And this is a similar type of situation. The best media strategy for dealing with this type of crime where there's a manifesto is not to publish the killer's photo, or if you're going to do that, do it in a limited way. And also not to publish the manifesto or to only refer to certain excerpts, but within a context of critical thinking and criticism. If you don't do that, what you risk doing is putting a motivation out there that motivates somebody else. For example, this is what I'm talking about. This is how you should do it. Here's an excerpt. Something about corruption and greed, and then it is not an issue of awareness at this point, but clearly power games at play. Evidently, I'm the first to face it with such brutal honesty. And isn't he calling on others to also face it? And also to be brutally honest. What does that actually mean? But look at the killer's word choices here. Greed, corruption. That's clearly what he opposes. And it's a good thing to do that. It's good to oppose greed. It's good to oppose corruption. But how should you oppose that? By assigning yourself random targets. And look at his motivation. Awareness. That's a word that he uses. Awareness. But he also says it's more than about awareness, and I think he's right. Think about the word choices he uses right at the end, right? Power games at play.
Very poor choice of words.
Think about, of all the words he could choose to use, he uses games at play. And think about how the CEO shooter has turned this into a kind of game, leaving behind clues and symbols. That is how games work. You leave their little rewards you pick up, and you must find this. Especially the words scrawled on the shell casings. A manifesto is essentially a motivation, and in this case, this killer was inspired by another killer's manifesto. So do you see, by publishing this manifesto and having everyone breathlessly discussing it, you're possibly publishing something that may serve as inspiration for the next killer and the next. Because the killer doesn't just want awareness for his cause, he wants attention for himself as well. He wants to come alive in the minds of many people. He wants to escape his own social death. There's a better way of doing it. Work hard, make friends, reach out, show that you care about other people, not your propensity towards destruction. And so we also see a kind of self-learned extremism via social media. Take a look. The fall of Rome, a great empire, and I was actually in Rome the other day, and compare that to America. Is America going to fall? Look at Luigi Mangione in January this year. What are your thoughts on this quote? It is no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And then this repost from Yuval Noah Harari's book, dealing with the Stone Age and the Bible and the resurgence of populism. Something similar happened with the Boston bombers, and this, in my opinion, is one of the most serious threats America faces. And this is why one does have to be careful what is out there on social media. You know, you have a country's own citizens self-radicalizing themselves. At a time when so many can't tell the difference between truth and fiction, between reality and delusion, that's a very, very dangerous and very, very slippery slope. Now, there's some materials that are safe, like The Catcher in the Rye. I think someone who read that got self-radicalized in some way. And you can't shut down everything because certain people are going to think what they're going to think regardless. But there's certain things that are poisonous psychologies, and especially where the information is actually not true to begin with. Right now, the undisputed leader in spreading this extremism on social media is, in my opinion, X. It's one of the only platforms without moderation, without checks and balances, and obviously that still has this guy's profile on it. That's bad for America. It's bad for everyone. Number 3, influence of drugs and gaming. And think about it, gaming can be like a drug. And when you're on drugs, everything can feel like a game. Look at this post by Culture Crave. And think about just that profile's name, Culture Crave. We are craving for information about this and that. We're addicted to information about this and that. We want to read about this manifesto. We don't really care. We just want to consume it mindlessly. NBC News says United Healthcare shooter was a video game killer. That does seem to be the case. He once belonged to a group of gamers who played as assassins. The game in question, Among Us. Anyone know that game? According to the Times, he has consistently advanced the conspiracy theory that the West is in the grip of Satanists and pedophiles, and the ideal means of infecting societies with this thought virus is social media. Now, what if you take information that is on social media and for whatever reason you're duped by it, you're duped into believing the world is worse than it actually is, and now you're going to take action based on this misinformation? In the same article from the Times, according to his LinkedIn profile, Mangione worked for the past 4 years as a data engineer at TrueCar, a digital vehicle sales company based in Santa Monica. By the way, his manifesto also refers to his education in technology. His last known address was in Honolulu, and he spent part of his last year in a co-living and co-working space there called Surfbreak HNL. Do you think he was working when he was there? But the pertinent part is his LinkedIn profile also states that he interned at the Johns Hopkins Laboratory for Computational Sensing and Robotics and at Firaxis Games, a video game developer. He wasn't just into games, he actually interned for a video game developer. And that brings us to number 4, mental health. I've said previously that Mangione is a symptom of what's happening to America. It's also a sign of America's collective decline in mental health. And Mangione was also aware of his own mental health feelings and his own mental health spiral. Look at some of these posts. According to the Financial Times, Mangione had posted about mental health on X, including a summary of social psychologist Jonathan Haid's book, The Anxious Generation. And I think there'd be a lot of people, a lot of these new followers on Luigi Mangione's X are saying, it's no measure of good health to be well adjusted to the sick society. Yes, let's talk about our sick societies. The society that's destroying us. What are you going to do about it? Of course, it's not a measure of good health to be so maladjusted that you want to kill people. Luigi was not talking to family for months at a time. So what could he have done to be in a better mental health state while engaged with his own family? Meanwhile, what is he doing? He's fashioning manifestos and self-made weapons and going to places expressly to murder someone. Is that mental health? Is that a constructive way to deal with anxiety or to solve problems? According to the Financial Times, our country is experiencing a slippery slope where the erosion of norms against political violence on one issue can spill over onto other issues. Someone also mentioned that what has just happened here crosses a critical threshold. Corporate people have never been targets, really, in the past. The Pennsylvania governor has said the suspect is no hero. That's Governor Josh Shapiro. He says, in America, we do not kill people in cold blood to resolve policy differences or express a viewpoint. Think about that in another way. We do not kill people to express a viewpoint. Isn't that what he did here? He killed someone. Oh, why did you kill someone? Well, here's my manifesto. I want to express and share my viewpoint. Couldn't you have done that in another way? Killing someone isn't heroic. Making something come alive is heroic. Giving birth to something, having an original thought is heroic. Saving someone is heroic. What the McDonald's worker did, that basically brought the investigation to the perpetrator, that was heroic. That took a certain amount of courage. Courage is heroic, cowardice isn't. Suffering and then letting the fear associated with that turn into hatred and then blame, which is kind of a path of least resistance, a path devoid of critical thinking. There's nothing heroic about that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.